Welcome back to ITFM Insights and part 2 of our series on hybrid IT. If you missed part 1, definitely go back and give it a listen. We covered why so many organizations are rethinking public cloud and the financial drivers pushing towards hybrid IT strategies. I'm your host, Kiara Zapanta, and today we're diving into the next big challenge, how to make hybrid IT work financially. That means getting clear on the true cost of ownership of private and public cloud versus on-prem. Understanding what's really driving infrastructure decision, and most importantly, how IT finance can lead the way. Marcus Breakwood, Executive Director with KPMG, is back with us. So Marcus, happy to have you back on. So to kick us off today, as organizations move towards hybrid IT, how can finance teams support the evaluation of different infrastructure options, not just by cost alone, but also by business impact?
Well, I'm going to start with cost because I do see a lot of need for finance to help IT in the cost arena make these decisions. And the first one I think is around how to trade costs. So if an organization wants to move, let's say, from the data center to the public cloud, they need to understand what are all the different costs that can be turned off to fund that transition. And if those costs can't be turned off, it may not make sense. And one of the biggest ones we see a lot of organizations forget about is the depreciation on their hardware. And let's say they just bought hardware 2 years ago and it's expected to be around for 5 years. If you make that migration to cloud, there could be a big write-off. So when you're doing this analysis of whether to keep it in the data center or move it to public cloud, look at the depreciation, look at the write-off. The other area we see our clients often forget about or don't manage well is the cost of facilities. So the data center has the cost of power. It has the cost of the air conditioning. It has the cost of the generator and the UPS. And that budget is often not in IT's budget. So our clients who successfully move workloads from the data center to the cloud, they can also move facilities budget from facilities to IT to fund the cloud. And if they can't, it's going to create a much larger budget impact to the CIO. On the flip side, if an organization is moving from the cloud to on-premises, there's one concept we talked about in the last podcast called reserved instances. It's basically when you're leasing cloud services for 1 to 3 years. And if you want to move them back, you need to know the impact is if I move this back to the data center, I still have 1 year left in my lease, and I'm going to have to pay the data center and pay the cloud provider. So both of these instances I've talked about also create what's called a double bubble, where whether you're moving from the data center to the cloud or the cloud to the data center, you're paying both at the same time. And I think finance has a big role to ask the questions, where are we going to pay twice? Because it's going to create a spike in your budget. But not only that, if you find out where you're paying twice, you can either go back to the cloud provider or the hardware provider and ask if they can provide some credits to help offset that transition cost. But I think the heart of the question was, how do you make a decision that's not just about cost, but it's also about business impact? And I'd say the primary place we see this is when organizations want to innovate and grow modern functions in the cloud, and it's going to increase the size of IT's budget. And finance, what they need to do here is they need to make sure there's a business case that is reviewed and created in joint partnership between IT and the business, where it understands like, hey, I'm going to increase revenue, or I'm going to increase customer satisfaction or speed to market to take advantage of these new features on the cloud. And it makes sense to increase IT's budget to do that.
Perfect. And now when it comes to actually modeling TCO or total cost of ownership across hybrid environments, what do organizations need to get right, especially when they're managing both fixed and variable cost structures?
I think the first thing is understanding what is apples to apples between on-premises and the cloud. And the way I always guide my clients is to Google, to do a Google search on this term, the cloud responsibility model. All the public cloud providers have one, and it shows you what are the responsibilities that the public cloud provider is responsible for, and what are the responsibilities that the client's responsible for. And you only want to model the costs to compare that the public cloud providers are responsible for. And I'm going to go over a couple as we talk through the TCO. The other main core point is only model for the future. I see some organizations make a mistake and they model the hardware they're using today. But in all honesty, you're not going to trade out the cost of the hardware today to move to the cloud or vice versa, because that's budget that's already spent. It's going to be the next purchase you do of network, server, and storage. You're either going to decide to make that purchase or you're going to decide to purchase cloud services. So only model for the future, only model future network, server, and storage quotes, and then make a decision. Are you going to buy that hardware or use that budget for the cloud? As I mentioned before, some of the other costs that you would need to model is facilities. Are you going to make a decision to continue paying that electricity, to upgrade the HVAC in the data center, and compare that as part of the TCO model of the public cloud? Because if you delay and stop major improvements in the data center for the HVAC, for the generators, the UPS, then as you turn off servers, turn off electricity, that can fund the cloud. Those are great costs to fund the cloud. Another area to think about is the cost of your IT operations for the servers, for the storage, for the hypervisor. These are costs that the cloud, they provide the support for the servers, for the storage, and for the hypervisor. And if you, let's say you're paying a managed service provider for every server, for every storage device, you can stop paying them as you move to the cloud, because the cloud provider will take on that responsibility. There's also another really interesting cost to model between the two, is the cost to transform or migrate from the data center to the cloud or vice versa. If you're migrating from the data center to the cloud, most cloud providers will credit the external services required. But if you come back, you're going to have to self-fund that with your own budget. And there's two more things, and I know I've got a long list here. I mentioned earlier in the last episode about logging and egress charges. So also ask the cloud provider, are there going to be additional costs on logs, on network, on egress that may not be so simple or intuitive at first? And then lastly, a lot of states are providing sales tax discounts if you manage and purchase software and hardware in your state and put it in a co-location facility. And that can be a 6 to 8% discount on your taxes. You can't get that in cloud. So that can come as a big discount to stay on premise. So again, in summary, the first two, look at the cloud responsibility model, only model for the future. And then my last couple of points are some areas to focus on that are in that responsibility model.
Yeah. Those are a lot of cost points to take into account, which is interesting. I think what really complicates things is when costs are siloed across different teams. So let's talk about visibility a little bit. How does a fragmented view across public cloud, on-prem, and private cloud impact financial planning?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to think about it. I think the main reason you need to bring those three views together is when you want to make decisions about what you're going to purchase next. And here's the reason why. So let's say you sign up with a cloud provider. What you usually do is you sign a contract for 3 to 5 years and you commit to a certain amount. So let's say you commit to $300 million over 4 years. You already know you're going to have to spend $300 million, and you're not going to make as many decisions on hey, is it worth going to cloud? Yes or no over those 4 years. You've already made that decision. You've already committed and you're just following your plan. Same with hardware. If you go buy $300 million of hardware, that hardware is going to be in your data center for 4 to 5 years, and you're probably not going to make a decision to move it up. You move the work, you're going to use it. The big reason to bring these costs together is when you make that next purchase decision. So let's say you're at the end of your 3 to 4 year cloud contract, or your hardware is going end of life. Then you need to compare the public cloud to the data center and decide, hey, do I want to move out of my data center to the cloud or vice versa? So in simple answer, when you're doing your next contract renewal, you need to bring this view together in that TCO model we mentioned to make your purchasing decision. And right now in the market, that major disruption in the hypervisor, in the hypervisor technology, it's causing almost everyone to go reevaluate their purchasing decisions with that TCO model.
Got it. Yeah, I think the lack of visibility can really stall decision making, I think, but when leaders can run into, do their run scenarios or what if analyses, I think they're in a much stronger position. So how can that kind of modeling guide smarter investment decisions?
Yeah, I think the what if analysis is extremely important, and the ways our clients use it are the following. First off, let's say you do a TCO analysis and what if on-premise versus cloud, and on-premise comes cheaper. It's going to help you negotiate with that cloud provider for a larger discount, and vice versa. Like if you notice that it's cheaper to go to cloud than on-premise, you may find that you've got a very low vCPU to core ratio, and your hardware provider has been selling you more hardware than you need. And you need to go back and have a hard talk with them about how much hardware they're selling you that's just sitting unused. But I do think outside of those negotiations, most organizations, they know that virtual machines can be similar costs between the data center and the cloud. Storage is almost always cheaper on premise, and VDI is almost always cheaper in cloud. The what if scenario just helps in those negotiations. But the one area that I'd say the industry hasn't really figured out is AI. And the top what if scenario we see right now is AI. And as I mentioned earlier, after you complete your first large AI workload in the cloud, you probably see that bill the next month and start thinking, what if I ran this in the data center? So AI what if scenarios are one of the hottest things we're seeing right now.
Got it. Yeah. I think scenario modeling is pretty powerful, especially with the shifts that you mentioned happening in AI. But I think not everything always boils down to cost. So what about those non-financial factors like performance, risk, or compliance that we mentioned before? And how should IT finance teams factor those into hybrid decisions?
Yep. And I'll start with security and compliance. And as I mentioned earlier, security and compliance can be cheaper in the cloud because it's just easier to automate. And I've had some clients do their first analysis of the cost of the data center, first cost of the cloud, and they didn't move as much because the data center was cheaper. But when they added in the cost to do some major security transformations, they found out the cloud was cheaper. So if you have a lot of, I'd say, security risks that have large programs to implement, it may be cheaper to implement those programs in the cloud, and it may help push you that way. The other area is on speed. So what you'll find in the cloud is it's much easier to deploy infrastructure in seconds or minutes or days, where most legacy setups in a data center could take days or weeks or months. And the cost for an IT team to retrofit the data center to have that speed of cloud may be a lot. So I'd also evaluate speed. And if the data center is coming up cheaper, but the speed isn't there, what's the cost to make the data center fast? And that may make the data center more expensive and may make it easier to move to cloud if speed is a need. If speed is a need.
Got it. Yeah. I think that's a really good point that like sometimes the fastest path isn't always the cheapest one, but maybe it can unlock more value. I think to also just to close this out, what's one step IT finance leaders can take right now to better evaluate and manage hybrid IT investments?
Well, because it's hybrid, I'm going to give you two steps, one for the cloud and one for on-premises. For the cloud, I would say build a cloud P&L and manage the budget versus actuals for each of your IT VPs. For on-premises, for your data center, I would ask your IT team about the disruption in the hypervisor market today, because they're probably trying to make a decision and they need some help. And that help is going to be around what stays in the data center, what goes to the cloud, and what type of hybrid environment do you have next year.
So that's a wrap on part 2 of our hybrid IT series. Marcus, thank you again for your insights. And if you're interested in a solution to help you understand the true financial impact of application migrations across your evolving hybrid IT landscape, be sure to check out IBM Apptio's new hybrid IT TCO impact solution. And you can learn more by visiting the Apptio blog. So if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow ITFM Insights on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.